Christopher Nolan's Tenet is brilliant, but it has one major storytelling problem. Christopher Nolan has built his career on taking complex ideas and turning them into blockbuster cinema. Dreams within dreams in Inception, relativity and time dilation in Interstellar, memory and identity in Memento. And then there is Tenet, a film so ambitious that it practically dares audiences to keep up. Now, before I start criticizing it, I want to make something very clear. I like Tenet, actually. I think it's a remarkable achievement. The action sequences are unlike anything we have seen before. The technical craftsmanship is extraordinary. Ludwig Göransson's score is phenomenal. The inverted set pieces are incredibly inventive, and Nolan deserves enormous credit for attempting something genuinely original in an era dominated by sequels and franchises. Even today, years after its release, Tenet remains as one of the most fascinating big-budget films ever made. But fascination and good storytelling aren't necessarily the same thing, because beneath all its brilliances lies a fundamental narrative issue. Tenet repeatedly relies on a form of Deus Ex Machina, and in doing so, it weakens its own dramatic stakes. What is a Deus Ex Machina? The term comes from the ancient Greek theater, literally meaning God from the machine. It refers to a crane that will lower a god into a stage to solve an otherwise impossible problem. The heroes are trapped. The conflict seems unsolvable. Then, suddenly, a god appears. Problem solved. Modern audiences generally dislike this technique because it violates one of storytelling's most important principles. The protagonist should solve the story's problem through their own choices, abilities, and growth. Victory should feel earned. When the solution appears from outside the narrative, tension evaporates. And that's exactly where Tenet starts running into trouble. At the end of Tenet, we discover that the entire story is actually one half of a massive temporal pincer movement. The protagonist isn't just participating in the operation, he's the architect of it. At some point after the events of the film, he goes to found Tenet, recruit Neil, send him on missions through the timeline, and ensure that every loose end is tied up. In other words, there is an older unseen version of the protagonist operating outside the story we have been watching. A version who already knows how everything unfolds. At first, this is an undeniably brilliant twist. It's elegant, it's clever, it transforms the entire narrative into a giant causal loop, but it also creates a storytelling problem. Because once the reveal happened, many of the film's most important events stop feeling like victories earned by the protagonist and start feeling like outcomes guaranteed by a version of him we never actually meet. Why does Neil show up exactly when he's needed? Because a future protagonist recruit him. Why are the right people in the right places? Because the future protagonist arranged it. Why do all the dangling threads eventually close into a perfect circle? Because an unseen protagonist has already spent years making sure they do. The film presents this as a temporal pincer movement, and conceptually it's fascinating.
Whoa.
But from a dramatic standpoint, it functions remarkably close to a giant Deus Ex Machina. Not because the solution comes from nowhere. In fact, Nolan carefully explains where it comes from. The problem is that the solution ultimately comes from outside the story we are experiencing. An invisible version of the protagonist reaches back through time and quietly ensures that everything works. The result is a narrative where the mystery becomes more satisfying than the struggle itself. The circle closes perfectly, maybe a little too perfectly. No character embodies this problem more than Neil. Neil is arguably the best character in the film. He is charismatic, likable, and Robert Pattinson delivers one of the strongest performances in the film. But narratively, Neil often functions less like a character and more like a plot device. Throughout the film, Neil consistently arrives exactly what the story requires of him. He saves the protagonist multiple times, and every time we are tempted to question it, the film responds with the same answer. It is because he's from the future. This explanation is logically consistent within the rules of the movie, but logical consistency isn't the same thing as dramatic satisfaction. A story can make perfect sense mechanically, while still feeling dramatically hollow. Neil doesn't solve problems because of decisions we witness. He solves them because the timeline requires him to. The script essentially grants him omniscience, and omniscience characters are dangerous because they can eliminate uncertainty. The climax of Tenet perfectly illustrates this problem. On paper, the Stalks 12 operation is extraordinary. Two armies moving through time in opposite directions. A temporal pincer movement. Massive scale. Unique visuals. Pure cinematic ambition. But emotionally, something feels missing. Compare it to the ending of The Dark Knight.
A Dark Knight.
Or Interstellar, or even Inception. Those climaxes revolve around difficult choices. Characters must risk failure. They must earn success. In Tenet, however, much of the battle feels predetermined. The heroes aren't discovering solutions. They are executing solutions that already exist. The future has already informed the present. The operation succeeds largely because it already succeeded. It's a fascinating paradox. But paradoxes don't automatically create tension. In fact, they can remove it. This is where I think Nolan occasionally confuses complexity with dramatic strength. Tenet is incredibly complex, but complexity alone doesn't create emotional investment. Audiences don't care because something is complicated. They care because characters struggle, because choices matters, because failure is possible, because victories must be earned. The greatest stories are not puzzles. They are human experiences. A puzzle asks, "Can you figure this out?" A drama asks, "Can the character overcome this?" Tenet spends so much energy on the first question that sometimes neglects the second. Now, here is the interesting part. Despite all of this criticism, Tenet still works. At least for me, because Nolan replaces emotional engagement with intellectual engagement. Instead of asking us to worry about what will happen, he asks us to figure it out how it happens. The mystery becomes the source of tension. The mechanics becomes the entertainment. And that's why the film remains so rewatchable. Even when the narrative occasionally leans on Deus Ex Machina-like solutions, the sheer creativity of the concept keeps us invested. The film is constantly presenting new ideas, new visual tricks, new temporal puzzles, new questions. And that's enough to carry many viewers through the experience. Tenet is one of the most ambitious blockbusters ever made. It's visually stunning, technically masterful, inventive, bold, and unlike almost anything else related at this scale. But it's also a film that repeatedly bypasses one of storytelling's most important rules. Rather than allowing its protagonist to solve problems through growth and agency, it often reveals that the solutions were already arranged by forces outside the immediate narrative, usually the future version of the protagonist himself. That's a form of Deus Ex Machina. Not because the explanation don't make sense, they do, but because dramatic resolutions increasingly comes from information and preparation that exists beyond the character's present actions. The result is a film that is endlessly fascinating, but occasionally less emotionally satisfying than Nolan's very best works. Tenet is a masterpiece of construction. The question is whether it's equally a masterpiece of storytelling, and for me, that's where the debate begins. Maybe that's the paradox of Tenet. But what do you think? Did Nolan create a masterpiece of storytelling or merely a masterpiece of construction? Leave your thoughts down below. And if you enjoy this analysis, subscribe for more film essays. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.